It is for the purposes of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, today the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 1302, providing for consideration of HR1808, the assault weapons ban of 2022, under a closed rule. The rule self-executes a manager's amendment from Chairman Nadler. It provides 1 hour of debate equally divided by the chair and ranking members of the Committee on Judiciary, and provides 1 motion to recommit. Madam Speaker, we have a gun violence crisis in this country. 23 years after Columbine High School, 10 years after Sandy Hook Elementary School, 4 years after Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and just 2 months after Uvalde and Buffalo, the American people are tired of living in fear. They are tired of thoughts and prayers. They are tired of press releases offering sympathy but no solutions. Last month, the decades-long logjam on passing common-sense gun safety bills was broken. President Biden signed into law the bipartisan Safer Communities Act to help keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Why? Because the American people want to see us act. For decades, that hasn't happened. The gun lobby had an iron grip on this place. But now, finally, that is changing. It's changing because the American people are demanding change. And it is time for all of us to listen. We can and must do more, which is why today we are considering H.R. 1808, the assault weapons ban of 2022. Now, I want to be crystal clear for everyone who is watching. This bill is not taking away anybody's guns. This bill is not about taking away anybody's constitutional rights. The Second Amendment gives Americans the right to own guns, but no right is unconditional or unlimited. You have the right to free speech, but you don't have the right to shout fire in a crowded movie theater. You have the right to keep and bear arms, but you don't have the right to own weapons being used to mow people down indiscriminately. Rights come with responsibilities, and we have a responsibility to try and stop mass shootings. As members of Congress, we have a duty to weigh the rights of gun owners with the very first right mentioned in the Declaration of Independence: the right to live, the right to not get shot at school or at a place of worship or at a concert. It takes zero courage to hide behind the Second Amendment and not debate the merits here. It takes courage? Standing up to the gun lobby, putting people over politics. That takes courage, and that is what we are doing here today. Rounds that come out of assault weapons are traveling up to 4 times faster than out of a handgun. They are traveling at incredible speed and inflict immense damage on people's bodies. When combined with high-capacity magazines, they are designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Assault weapons do not belong on our streets, plain and simple. An assault weapon was used in Las Vegas to kill 60 people. An assault weapon was used at the Pulse nightclub to kill 49 people. An assault weapon was used in Sandy Hook to kill 26 people, including 20 children. Assault weapons slaughter people. They decimate bodies. Physicians say that an AR-15 can actually, and I quote, liquefy your organs because the projectile is traveling so fast. This does not happen with a typical handgun. This is something unique to assault weapons. 67% of Americans, including half of all Republicans, support a ban on assault weapons. This is not a radical idea. We are not in uncharted territory. The government already bans automatic weapons. Why? Because they have no place in our communities. You don't need an automatic weapon to defend yourself. And what we are proposing today is simply addressing another class of weapons that have no place in our communities: assault weapons. The 1994 assault weapons ban was associated with a 25% drop in gun massacres and a 40% drop in fatalities. This should not be a difficult vote. So let's come together and advance this common sense legislation that could save thousands of lives. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to thank the distinguished chairman for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I appreciate it, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The rule before us today makes in order HR 1808, an unconstitutional bill to ban hundreds of the most popular firearms in the United States, including the sporting rifle, the AR-15. Law-abiding Americans in places like southwestern Pennsylvania and across the country use firearms every single day for things like sport shooting, hunting, and self-defense. So despite what the House Democrats claim, this bill would do little to prevent the mass shootings or the crime they're saying that it would. And this bill would not prevent criminals from obtaining firearms. I know the chairman just referenced the 1994 study. That was a congressionally mandated study to look at the 1994 assault weapons ban. That study found that ban was ineffective in reducing violent crime, as, and I quote, "the banned guns were never used in more than a modest fraction of all gun murders," end quote. Now, a follow-up study to that 1994 ban came out in 2004, and that study found that the ban's effects, and I quote, "the ban's effects on gun violence are likely to be small at best and perhaps too small for reliable measurement," end quote. Even the UCLA law professor, Adam Winkler, the resident anti-gun so-called subject matter expert, that left-leaning professor stated, "there's no way to make assault rifle bans effective," end quote. And to that point, we saw that during the tragic shootings in San Bernardino, Newtown, and Buffalo, those all occurred in states that already had assault weapons bans on the books. So the question is this: why are my far-left Democratic colleagues bringing this bill to the floor today? Well, in the words of Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler, banning common-use firearms is the point of the bill. In other words, let's call this for what it is. It's a gun grab, pure and simple. This bill is not about public safety. Rather, this is the most severe restriction on the Second Amendment since the passage of the assault weapons ban of 1994. It would turn an American lending a firearm to a friend to go hunting into a criminal. I urge my colleagues to oppose this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the gentleman talks about statistics. Let's talk about statistics. 30% of shootings in recent history have involved guns that were banned under the now expired 1994 assault weapons ban. 13 killed and 23 injured at Columbine High School in Littletown, Colorado. The attackers used an assault weapon. 27 killed and 1 injured at the elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut. That was in December 2012. The attacker used an assault weapon. 49 killed and 53 injured at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. June 2016, the attacker used an assault weapon. 58 killed and 887 injured at a country music festival in Las Vegas in October 2017. The attacker used an assault weapon. 17 killed and 17 injured at a high school in Parkland, Florida, February 2018. The alleged attacker used an assault weapon. I could go on and on. 23 killed and 26 injured at a Walmart in El Paso, August 2019. The attacker used an assault weapon. 10 killed and 1 injured at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, March 2021. The attacker used an assault weapon. I ask unanimous consent that this be entered into the record.
Without objection.
I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina and a member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ross.
Is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I represent a southern state. Many of my constituents are responsible, law-abiding gun owners, and I support their ability to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Contrary to what opponents of this legislation continue to claim, this bill will allow current law-abiding gun owners to keep all of their guns. It simply prevents future sales of assault rifles. And let's be clear, assault weapons are designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. They're not designed for recreation. They're designed for combat. It's incredibly irresponsible to allow people without specialized training to possess these weapons. And Madam Speaker, when assault weapons are used in mass shootings, an average of 6 times as many people are shot as in other mass shootings. In 2022, there have already been 24 school shootings. The deadliest in Uvalde, Texas, involved assault weapons. But if my friends across the aisle are not convinced of the need to protect our children, perhaps they will be convinced of the need to protect the police. According to Violence Policy Center, 1/4 of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty in 2016 were killed by an assault weapon. After the assault weapons ban expired, the proportion of large-capacity magazines-equipped guns used in murder of police increased by 30%. These weapons belong with our military, not on our streets or in our schools. I urge my colleagues to support the rule and the bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. This false equivalency between an AR-15 and a so-called weapon of war just shows the ignorance of my friends across the other side of the aisle. An AR-15 is not an M16. An M16 has numerous functions: safety, 3-round burst, semi-automatic, and fully automatic. An AR-15 has there's no such setting as the 3-round burst and the fully automatic. So this false comparison between a so-called weapon of war and what we would describe as a sporting rifle, again, shows the lack of understanding about these platforms. Additionally, the AR-15 is by far the most popular sporting rifle in the United States. There's over 20 million that are in possession of Americans right now. But while we're talking about statistics, a 2020 FBI study shows that there are more murders committed with knives, clubs, and fists than with firearms. Also, when you're looking at firearm deaths, just in the year 2020, both the CDC and the FBI reported that over half of these firearm-related deaths were suicides. So let's just be clear when we're talking about the statistics. And if you're breaking down those studies, you can look at 2020, where 59% of murders were committed by handguns. Only 3% were committed what's being described as assault rifles, what I would describe as sporting rifles. But here to talk more about this issue is my good friend from the Rules Committee, my colleague from Minnesota, Representative Fischbach, and I yield her 2 minutes.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague from the Rules Committee for providing me the time to speak. Madam Speaker, my colleagues are proving yet again that they want to strip law-abiding citizens of their Second Amendment rights. The latest so-called assault weapons ban is unconstitutional and will impact other aspects of American life. This bill would end the sale of some of the most popular rifles sold in America today, impacting the sporting industry and all of those who rely on it for their livelihood. This bill will have an impact in ways even the supporters of the bill don't understand. For example, under this law, stabilizing braces for pistols would be outlawed. Despite what some of my colleagues have said, stabilizing braces are not bump stocks and will not turn a pistol into an assault rifle. Stabilizing braces are used by hunters with disabilities, including many of our disabled veterans, to help them safely hunt with pistols. Not only is this bill an assault on our constitutional rights, but the loss of the revenue from the sales of these firearms will also have a devastating effect on the Federal Aid to Wildlife Restoration Fund, which helps states pay for environmental conservation efforts. The bill provides no alternative for how to make up for this severe decrease in conservation funding. Democrats are no longer disguising their radical agenda to ban guns and do away with the Constitution's Second Amendment. My colleagues from the other side have said that they will do everything they can to ban guns in this country, even to the point of packing the Supreme Court to make it happen. Everyone who thinks this bill is not a step in that direction is kidding themselves. This is yet another attempt from the left to strip law-abiding citizens of their Second Amendment rights, and I oppose this bill and the rule. Thank you.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Just respond to the gentlelady by saying that the manager's amendment adds language to make clear that devices used to make hunting accessible to everyone, especially our disabled veterans, are not affected by this legislation. This provision also makes sure the gun industry cannot exploit legitimate accessibility devices to make firearms especially deadly for mass shooters, as has occurred in the past when bump stocks were claimed to be an accessibility accessory, but used to inflict horrible mass violence in the 2017 Las Vegas shooting that killed 60 and injured more than 400 people. And I want to say to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, I didn't use the words weapon of war in my opening statement, and I certainly know the difference between an automatic and a semi-automatic weapon. But if that's the argument you want to have, bring that to the parents whose children were lost in Uvalde. Who were mowed down by an AR-15. And as I pointed out in my opening statement, these weapons actually decimate bodies. Physicians say that an AR-15 can actually liquefy your organs because the projectile is traveling so fast. As the gentleman may recall, DNA samples had to be gathered from those children who were murdered because their bodies were unrecognizable. So, I mean, come on. This is about saving lives, and so I appreciate that. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
The gentleman is recognized.
Weapons of war are designed for war. They're designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Our country is exceptional in making these weapons of war, these assault weapons, available in the civilian sector, and we have quickly, because those weapons are easier to qualify for than getting a driver's license, they're easier for a teenager to get than to buy a beer. Because we've done that, we've turned our churches, our schools, our shopping centers, our entertainment venues, almost any place, into a battleground, with one massacre after another. There is no Second Amendment right to own a machine gun, which has been banned in this country since, I believe, the 30s. But if you talk about rights, how about the rights of those little children in Uvalde to live? The rights of those families to be whole. They have rights also, and that's what we're about protecting today. I think that we just cannot continue to live like we have been living in the shadow of fear, a terrible kind of American exceptionalism, where we are horribly exceptional to the amount of dead children gunned down in their best tennis shoes after end of the school year celebrations, of young parents having to bury their still younger little children, where we are the exception in how many congregants die where they are massacred in their churches or in their temples, where we are the exception, the outlier, in how many gruesome, bullet-ridden bodies our doctors see month after month. And God help us, because Texas has been among the worst, from El Paso to Uvalde to across the center of the state to the Houston area. Murderers, massacres with assault weapons, where one family after another grieves. Have you known?
The gentleman's recognized.
Texas children right now have no reality, as they will soon be returning to school, than to duck and cover and learn new exercises. We can do something about that. And banning assault weapons is the most critical issue in doing that. Not the kind of weak, modest measure that will never change things in Texas that we passed earlier in the year, since it's dependent on the Texas legislature, but a direct effort to limit the access to assault weapons that are weapons of war that kill and kill and kill, that make us exceptional in quite the wrong way. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to note that the gentleman from Massachusetts said that no one on his side is describing these weapons as quote-unquote weapons of war. And then the gentleman from Texas, the first thing he said was that AR-15s are weapons of war. So we need to understand that when the left and when radical Democrats are describing AR-15s as quote-unquote weapons of war, and as the gentleman from Texas just said, machine guns, they're doing two things simultaneously. Number one, they're showing their absolute ignorance for how these platforms operate, and two, they're deliberately trying to mislead the American people on what these platforms do. No one on my side of the aisle is trying to say that machine guns should be legal. An AR-15 is a sporting rifle. It's a semi-automatic. It is not the kind of platform that is used by the military. It's not an M16. It's not an M4. But again, the other side tries to use this to muddy the waters, confuse the American people, and to put all firearms in the same category. But let's talk about some more statistics. In 2021, a Georgetown study found that 1.67 million instances were found where firearms were used in self-defense. And in 2019 alone, there were 386 self-defense killings that were determined to be justified. So these are just some of the ways in which someone could legally use a sporting rifle. But let's talk about the chaos at the southern border. Since Joe Biden took office, over 3.1 million illegal immigrants have been apprehended at the southern border. And that includes 56 illegal immigrants who are on the terror watch list. President Biden and House Democrats have this open door policy that's created a humanitarian crisis and a security crisis as well. And they want to make things worse by lifting Title 42. Republicans know border security is national security. That's why if we defeat the previous question, I will personally offer an amendment to the rule to immediately consider HR 471, the Pause Act of 2021, to enforce Title 42. Madam Speaker, I'd ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment in the record along with any extraneous materials immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Here to explain the amendment is my good friend from the great state of Texas, Representative Chip Roy, and I yield him 3 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I appreciate his leadership on this matter. And yeah, we shouldn't be talking about disarming the American people when it is my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that are leaving the American people exposed to dangerous cartels and dangerous narcotics flying to our communities and dangerous criminal gang members and criminals that are coming in and harming the American people, including people that are affiliated with terrorist countries and organizations. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't seem to care a whit about that. Yesterday, Mayor Bowser is all upset because 4,000 people have been bused to D.C. from Texas since April. 4,000 people. Do you know how many people were apprehended in Texas yesterday? About 4,000 people. Welcome to the party, because that's the reality of what we're dealing with at our southern border. And virtually all of the people being apprehended are being released into the United States under notice to appear or parole. There is only one barrier to all being released, and that is the use of Title 42 during a pandemic. Now, I notice a number of the staff, a number of the folks on the other side of the aisles, people that are still masked. We still are under emergency declarations, and yet we're going to allow people to flow into this country, and we're going to remove the one last vestige of security that this administration remotely will actually look at and use, Title 42 at our border. They're building facilities to process more people to release them into the United States. Mayor Bowser wants to complain and then call out the National Guard because 4,000 people were shipped from Texas to D.C. This 4,000 that Texas gets on a daily basis. Again, welcome to the dang party. And you know what? You know what you're not talking about, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle? The 73 human beings caught in a stash house in Washington, D.C. this week. 73 human beings in a stash house in our nation's capital. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, my colleagues particularly on the Judiciary Committee, brushed that aside, patting themselves on the back in the false name of compassion for how much they love brown people for having open borders. Well, the brown people in South Texas are sick and tired of it. The brown people of South Texas that I know, the candidates on my side of the aisle, are standing up for a secure border, and that begins with enforcing our laws under Title 42 during a pandemic to ensure that we turn people away. My friend Yvette Harrell introduced a bill that would solve the problem, and that is what we would proceed to. We have a discharge petition that would unleash that bill. I welcome any of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join that discharge petition, perhaps particularly if you're in a tough race. You might want to be able to go home and say that you actually care about a secure border. But what I'll tell you is that we should be moving to secure the border of the United States rather than fooling the fool's errand of unconstitutional taking of the American Second Amendment rights. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me just say something to my friend from Pennsylvania. Maybe it's true that the military doesn't use AR-15s, but I will say to the gentleman that mass shooters do. And we saw what an AR-15 could do in Uvalde. We saw what it could do in Buffalo. And I just remind people, when you have these kind of debates, the people are watching. The parents who lost their children in Uvalde, they're watching. People who've lost loved ones to mass shootings all around this country are watching. And to try to parse words over, like, well, it's not a military-style weapon or this or that, whatever. And when we know what these weapons can do, that little children had to be identified with DNA samples because their bodies were blown apart. And you want to talk about extreme positions. We just had a Rules Committee meeting, and Mr. Massey testified before the Rules Committee. You may recall the back and forth between him and Mr. Raskin, when Mr. Raskin essentially asked him whether or not machine guns should be legal. And Mr. Massey responded by saying, well, I think states should make that determination. So that means that if a state wanted to make machine guns legal, it's somehow okay? So let's not, you want to talk about extremism. We've seen what extremism is all about from many of my friends on the other side of the aisle. And we have seen the power of the gun lobby, the blood money that has poured into campaigns, that has resulted in people coming to the floor and making these ridiculous arguments for us to do nothing. So this is a moment when people have to stand up and be counted. I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Thank you,
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. We can see the lengths that Democrats have gone to simply try to save lives. With John Lewis, we said on the floor of the House, not regarding what would happen to us personally after Parkland, and literally said, you have got to do something. As John Lewis said, never give up, never give in, never give out. The moral authority of this Congress. We failed because my friends on the other side of the aisle just could not see the carnage and bloodshed that happened to Parkland or Sandy Hook and elsewhere. Now, we have in the backdrop El Paso. We have Uvalde, and I repeat myself, going there days after that tragedy and literally hugging crying 9-year-olds who should be in the playground, who are crying because of their lost and deceased friends. And the story that is so powerful, 2 of them, one that bled to death and one that smeared themselves with blood to live. Do we now stand in the way of stopping carnage and bloodshed? And my good friend that I've done a lot of things with, M4, M16, are weapons of war if I have the correct numbers, and I believe I do. You can pontificate about that. But frankly, the language is assault-styled weapons. That's what it is. And assault-style weapons still do not belong in civilians' hands. Because the munitions that are used in war, when soldiers can't even bring their weapons of war home when they are off duty or coming home to see family members or traveling as a civilian, it is because they are killers. And that is what killed those children in Parkland, Highland. That's what killed them in Uvalde, in Buffalo. That's what killed these people in El Paso. And in the hands, in some instances, of white supremacists. But let me be very clear as I thank Mr. Cicilline for this legislation. He prohibits those possession. Many of them are grandfathered in. And I wish somebody would read the bill. These are weapons already grandfathered in. Don't frighten the American people. What is most frightening are the parents who are outside these doors.
Expired.
Minute.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. What is really frightening is that parents who are outside these doors are asking the question, what are we doing? And I would say the families in Buffalo, where the theme was replacement theory, or these little babies, where is your heart in a reasonable bill that prohibits the sale, manufacture, transfer, possession of semiotic assault weapons and large capacity ammunition, feeding devices subject to grandfathering provisions, but in actuality allows the possession of any semiotic assault weapon lawfully possessed on the date of enactment? How much fairer can we get? I only ask my colleagues to stop pontificating to us like we know less than you when it comes, as a civilian, that there are weapons of war that our military have, and there are assault-style weapons that are in the hands of citizens on the streets of this country, and they adapt the same munitions, because the individual in Uvalde had 350 pounds. I yield back. Let us vote for the rule and the underlying bill. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves, and I'd like to remind the members to please direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, I have a lot of respect for my colleague from Texas, but when the question is asked why service members can't bring their M16 and their M4s home, it's because those are fully automatic weapons. They are not AR-15s. The gentlelady actually answers her own question. The M16 and the M4 platform are automatic. The AR-15 is not automatic. They're two different platforms. The gentlelady and the gentleman from Texas said words to the effect of, what are we doing? Why are Republicans not doing enough, or words to that effect? Well, let me remind my colleagues across the aisle that it was Republicans, not Democrats. It was Republicans in 2017 that had the Fix NICS Act. It's Republicans that are trying to get legislation passed to keep guns out of the hands of criminals, not out of the hands of law-abiding citizens. And it was the last administration under President Trump that banned bump stocks when the Obama administration let that ban expire. So there's just a few things that Republicans are doing in this arena. But I yield 2 minutes to my good friend, Mario Diaz-Balart of Florida. I yield him 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman. You know, Title 42 is a critical tool to manage the crisis at the southern border. And hard to believe, but the Biden administration claims that the termination of Title 42 would actually decrease the number of encounters at the border. This is not only grotesquely disingenuous, it's actually laughable. Does the administration not remember the caravans headed to the southern border when the administration just announced the end of Title 42? You know, the cartels actually use the end of 42 to promote, to advertise their human smuggling business. Has the administration even spoken to the our brave heroes, the patrol agents, who consistently say that without Title 42 authority, they would lose any semblance of operational control on the border? So let's be clear, the expected influx of border crossings if Title 42 were ended is not just a humanitarian crisis, which it is, it's a national security crisis as well. The cartels will once again use the increased flow as a distraction to continue to bring in record amount of narcotics such as fentanyl. So, Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question so that we can bring up HR 471, the Pause Act, to help give our border agents the tools that they need in order to achieve operational control of the border. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from
Madam Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. I would like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend from the state of Georgia, 2 minutes to Mr. Heiss.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you so much, and I am amazed at how my radical friends on the left now are so concerned with the lives of children when they literally stand and cheer and celebrate the killing of 3,000 through abortion every single day. But, Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this rule that allows consideration of the assault weapons ban. But what we have here going on right now is a complete disregard for regular order that started yesterday and it's continuing here today. The House floor is being run like a circus, quite frankly, and the American people deserve better than this. They continue, the Democrats do, to ram legislation through without proper notice and without even markup in committees. The floor should be run with at least a basic sense of decorum, and that is totally out of control right now. There's a complete lack of respect for the rules and the norms of this historic institution and how it should be run. Now, as for the legislation being considered, it's just another attempt by the radical left to once again take away the Second Amendment rights of the American people. Madam Speaker, time and time again, the left here has tried to disregard and trample the constitutional rights of the American people. This bill is full, among other things, of questionable definitions that show that the left don't even know what they're talking about when it comes to the issue of assault weapons. I implore my colleagues to vote against this rule, the previous question as well. Again, I thank my colleague for giving me a moment, and I yield back.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, very briefly, maybe the gentleman hasn't been paying attention to what's been going on around here, but this bill actually had a hearing, had a markup, 14 hours in the Judiciary Committee. The text has been available 72 hours in advance. The manager's amendment was made available on Tuesday night. I mean, I don't know what the heck he's talking about, but anyway, I reserve my time.
And reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Georgia, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. Now, while we're here debating about an assault weapons ban so that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee can campaign when he goes back home, which is really odd because in that district, in that area of New York, they don't seem to be suffering from as much crime as the rest of New York, where people really do need guns to defend themselves, or maybe the rest of America, or like Atlanta in my home state of Georgia. And I will tell you something right now. I thank God for AR-15s because there have been a lot of people that have saved their own lives and defended others, and I'll remind you of a few. How about an 8-month pregnant woman who saved her husband and daughter's life from home invaders who were trying to kill them? Thank God she had an AR-15. Let me remind you of a man that had an AR-15 that was able to defend a church from a mass shooter who killed 26 people in the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Thank God for his AR-15. Let me explain something to my Democrat colleagues. You can pass as many gun control laws as you like, but no one will stop a murderer. No one is going to hand over a gun who has murder in their heart. Do you think that your gun control laws are going to cause criminals to come running to hand over the AR-15s that they possess? No, I don't think so. So if you're concerned about protecting Americans and saving lives, stop voting to kill babies up until the day of birth, care about those children and their body parts, and then do something about all the crime all over America that are affecting every single day Americans. How about our border? How about our border being overrun with drugs and fentanyl and human trafficking? Do you care about those people, those migrants who are dying on the way because of your policies of open borders? Oh no, it's not the gun that is the problem. It's the policies. And it's the policies that you're pushing right now that are hurting Americans and causing our country to not be safe.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Members are again asked to remember to direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized. Oh, I'm sorry, Massachusetts. My apologies.
I'm going to reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whether it's Pennsylvania or Massachusetts, there's still two great commonwealths, right? Madam Speaker, I have no further speakers at this time. I yield myself the balance of the time we have left for my closing.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I'm incredibly disappointed, but unfortunately not at all surprised that once again we're considering legislation that will do nothing more than penalize law-abiding citizens while doing absolutely nothing about the root cause of gun violence. We know from history, we know from numerous studies that I've talked about today, that assault weapon bans do not work. So why is this bill coming before us today? It's just the latest in the House Democrats' never-ending attack on America's Second Amendment rights. I therefore urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question, no on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have great respect for my friend from Pennsylvania and all my colleagues on the Rules Committee, and I know they feel strongly about this issue. And I believe that many of the concerns that they have raised are unwarranted, and this bill deals with many of them. And as has been said repeatedly, this is not about taking away anybody's guns. It is dealing with the future. It is dealing with ways that we can better protect the people of this country. And so it's frustrating when we hear arguments about, oh, you used the word, you said military style, this technically isn't a military weapon, or we have all these numbers that have been kind of manipulated and presented as reasons for us to do nothing. I find that really disconcerting. I mean, when you, and maybe it's because so many people are dying. Maybe it's because so many people are being murdered by these weapons. I mean, the sheer number is incomprehensible. And maybe some of my colleagues have lost the human ability to feel what that really means. I mean, I've talked to parents, I've talked to brothers and sisters, to grandparents who have lost loved ones in these massacres, who have lost loved ones to assault weapons. I mean, it is painful, and we can do something to make it possible that fewer people are victims of mass shootings, that fewer children die, that fewer churchgoers die, that fewer people shopping in their grocery stores or going to a concert, or just minding their own business. I mean, the gun violence in this country has reached epidemic proportions. It is unbelievable. And the American people are sick and tired of being scared. I mean, when my own kids go to the movies, I worry about them. I'm worried that there might be somebody with an AR-15 that will be in that movie theater. Or if they go to a concert, I think my anxiety is similar to the anxiety of most parents when their kids go out. This doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. And I think all I'm pleading with my colleagues to do is to think long and hard on how they vote on this. We should all be sick to our stomachs about what's happening. And the idea that somehow we can't do anything about it, I don't think anybody buys. And I get it. The gun lobby plays a big role with many of my friends on the other side of the aisle. Follow the money, you'll see what I'm talking about. And I know they don't want you to do anything, but I'm pleading with my colleagues, especially on the Republican side of the aisle. I mean, this is the right thing to do. The previous assault weapons ban had an impact. Unfortunately, it was left to expire. I mean, we need to pass this. This is the right thing to do. Talk to the families. Talk to those who lost loved ones in one of these massacres. And as I said, I mean, to defend, AR-15s, I mean, that can destroy the bodies of people. I remind you that the children in Uvalde, many of them had to be identified by DNA. I mean, at some point, we have to say enough is enough. At some point, we have to turn our words into action, and I'm hoping and praying that this is the day. So I urge all my colleagues to vote for the rule and vote for the previous question. I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question of the resolution.
The gentleman yields. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On that, I'd request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays have been requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution. This is a 15-minute vote. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Tlaib and Ms. Omar, I inform the House that these members will vote aye on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker person, as a member designated by Mr. John Carter, Mr. Troy Nels, and Ms. Kate Granger of Texas, I inform the House that they will all vote no on the previous question.
Does the gentleman from North Dakota seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Taylor from Texas and Ms. Malliotakis from New York, I inform the House that they will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Sewell of Alabama, I inform the House that Ms. Sewell will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Wilson from South Carolina, inform the House that Mr. Wilson will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Member designated by Mr. Crawford of Arkansas, I inform the House that Mr. Crawford will vote no on ordering the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Tom Tiffany of Wisconsin, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House Mr. Tiffany will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Wenstrup of Ohio and Mr. LaHood of Illinois, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Wenstrup and Mr. LaHood will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Craig, Ms. Stevens, Ms. Bustos, Mr. Blumenauer, and Mr. Ryan, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Williams, Ms. Moore, Mr. Caston, Ms. Bass, Mr. Evans, Ms. Shafferthlis McCormick, and Ms. Strickland, I inform the House that those 8 or 9 members will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Cardenas, inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote yea on the previous question.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bob Good of Virginia, I inform the House that Mr. Good will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Congress members Cahaley, Mike Thompson, Andy Levin, Bordeaux, Vargas, Swalwell, Torres, Cuellar, and Panetta, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Van Drew of New Jersey, Mr. Green of Tennessee, Mr. Jacobs of New York, and Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee, I inform the House that Mr. Desjardins, Mr. Van Drew, Mr. Green, and Mr. Jacobs all will vote nay on the previous question. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana, I inform the House that Mr. Johnson will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Macbeth of Georgia pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Macbeth will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Blunt Rochester and Mr. Veazey pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Blunt Rochester and Mr. Veazey will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Chairman Richie Neal of Massachusetts, I inform the House that Chairman Neal will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Missouri seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina, Mr. Guthrie of Kentucky, and Mr. Barr of Kentucky, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry, Mr. Guthrie, and Mr. Barr will vote nay on the previous question.
Purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mrs. Miller of West Virginia, I inform the House that Mrs. Miller will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Slegger Fernandez of New Mexico and Jackie Spear of California, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Dusty Johnson of South Dakota, I inform the House that Mr. Johnson will vote nay on the previous question. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by members Rice, Lawson, Christ, Smith, Deutsch, and Maloney, Carolyn, I inform the House that these members will vote yea on ordering the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Yes, as the member designated by Mr. Jimenez of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Jimenez will vote no on the previous question. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. As a member designated by Ms. Diana DeGette of Colorado, Mr. Mark Desagne of California, Mr. Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, Mr. Tom Swazi of New York, and Mr. David Scott of Georgia, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the previous question.
Purpose Pennsylvania seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Dr. Joyce of Pennsylvania, Ms. Stefanik of New York, Mr. Comer of Kentucky, and Dr. Miller Meeks of Iowa, I inform the House that Dr. Joyce, Dr. Meeks, Ms. Stefanik, and Mr. Comer will be voting no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Herrera, Butler, Stewart, Garbarino, Letlow, Hartzler, Curtis, and Owens from several different states, they will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series, Ms. Ann Kirkpatrick, Mr. Jerry McNerney, Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson, Ms. Pramila Jayapal, Mr. John Garamendi, Mr. Donald Payne, and Mr. Peter Welch, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Babin of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Babin will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Pursuant to House Resolution 965, I inform the House that Lauren Boebert will vote no.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Boyle, Mr. Ruppersberger, Ms. Trahan, Mr. McEachin, Ms. Newman, and Mr. Mondaire Jones, I inform the House these members will vote yes on the previous question.
Gentleman from Indiana seek recognition.
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Gibbs from Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Representative Mr. Jeffries of New York pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Representative Jeffrey will vote yes on the motion to move the previous question on HR 1302.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote no on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, Mr. Katko of New York, and Mr. Rice of South Carolina, inform the House that Messrs. Gonzalez, Katko, and Rice will vote nay on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Dr. Gosar of Arizona, I inform the House that Dr. Gosar will vote no on HRS 1302.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Bowman and Ms. Bush, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the previous question.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Spartz and Ms. Walorski, both of Indiana, I inform the House that Ms. Spartz and Ms. Walorski will both vote no on the previous question.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Virginia rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Porter, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on the previous question.
This gentlewoman from Florida rise.
Inform the House that Mr. Jimenez will vote no on the previous question.
On this vote, the yeas are 215 and the nays are 205. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have. Purpose of the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On that, I'd request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. For what purposes, gentlemen from North Carolina rise?
Speaker, as a member designated by Congresswoman Boebert of Colorado, I inform the House that Congresswoman Boebert will vote no.
What person, gentlelady from Michigan, rise?
Member designated by Ms. Tlaib and Ms. Omar, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on HRES 1302.
For what purposes, gentleman from Pennsylvania, rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Miller Meeks of Iowa, Comer of Kentucky, Stefanik of New York, and John Joyce of PA, I inform the House that those members will be voting no on agreeing to the resolution.
What purposes, gentlewoman from Texas, rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Spear of California and Ms. Legger Fernandez of New Mexico, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on the House Res 1302. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purposes, gentlemen from Indiana, rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Ms. Walorski and Ms. Sparks, both of Indiana, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski and Ms. Sparks will both vote no on the previous question.
What purposes, gentlemen from Michigan, rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Neal of Massachusetts, I inform the House that Mr. Neal will vote yes on HRES 1302.
Gentleman from Ohio, rise.
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Wenstrup of Ohio and Mr. LaHood of Illinois, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Wenstrup and Mr. LaHood will vote nay on the adoption of the rule.
For what purposes, gentlemen from Georgia, rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Macbeth of Georgia, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Macbeth will vote yes on HRES 1302.
What purposes, gentlewoman from Oklahoma, rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez will vote no on the previous question.
What purposes, gentlewoman from Virginia, rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Ms. Porter, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on HRES 1302.
Purposes, gentlemen from Texas, rise.
Speaker, person as member designated by Mr. John Carter of the great state of Texas, Kate Graves of the great state of Texas, and Tornado of the great state of Texas, I inform the House they all vote no on the rule.
What purposes, gentlewoman from New York, rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Representative Mr. Jeffries of New York, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Representative Jeffries will vote yes on H.R. 1302.
What purposes, gentlemen from Michigan, rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Kako of New York, Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, Mr. Rice of South Carolina, I inform the House Mr. Gonzalez, Kako, and Rice will vote nay on the rule.
For what purposes, gentlemen from New Jersey, rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series, Ms. Ann Kirkpatrick, Mr. Jerry McNerney, Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson, Ms. Pramila Jayapal, Mr. John Garamendi, Mr. Donald Payne, and Mr. Peter Welch. Inform the House that these members will vote yes on HRES 1302.
For what purposes does the gentleman from
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Stubbe of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Stubbe will vote no on the rule.
For what purposes, gentlemen from Florida, rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Cardenas, I inform the House that Mr. Cardenas will vote yay on HRES 1302.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
As the member designated by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio, I inform the House that Mr. Gibbs will vote nay on the rule.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Carolyn Maloney of New York, Christ, Smith, Deutsch, Lawson, and Rice, I inform the House that these members will vote yay on HRES 1302.
What purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Congressman Mike Johnson, Louisiana, I inform the House that Congressman Johnson will vote no on HRES 1302.
What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Sewell of Alabama, I inform the House that Ms. Sewell will vote yes on HRES 1302.
For what purposes does the gentleman North Dakota rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Taylor from Texas and Ms. Maliatakis from New York, I inform the House that they will vote no on the rule.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from New York rise?
As a member designated by Ms. Bush and Mr. Bowman, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on HRES 1302.
What purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
As the member designated by Mr. Crawford of Arkansas, I inform the House that Mr. Crawford will vote no.
What purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Congress members Cahaley,
Mike Thompson, Andy Levin, Bordeaux, Vargas, Swalwell, Richie Torres, and Henry Cuellar. I inform the House that these members will vote yes on HRS 1302.
What purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. McHenry of North Carolina, Mr. Barr of Kentucky, and Mr. Guthrie of Kentucky, I inform the House that Mr. McHenry, Mr. Barr, and Mr. Guthrie will vote nay on the rule.
What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Williams, Ms. Moore, Mr. Caston, Ms. Bass, Mr. Evans, Mr. Furless McCormick, and Ms. Strickland, I inform the House and the distinguished speaker from the state of Texas that these members will vote yes on HRS 1302.
What purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Tom Tiffany of Wisconsin, pursuant to House Resolution 8, inform the House Mr. Tiffany will vote no on HR 1302.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise?
As the member designated by Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Veazey, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Ms. Blunt Rochester and Mr. Veazey will vote yes on HR 1302.
What purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Dusty Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Van Drew of New Jersey, Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee, and Mr. Green of Tennessee, I inform the House that Mr. Johnson, Mr. Van Drew, Mr. Desjardins, and Mr. Green all will vote nay on the rule. Thank you.
What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. As a member designated by Ms. Diana DeGette of Colorado, Mr. Mark DeSagne of California, Mr. Seth Moulton of Massachusetts, Mr. Tom Swazi of New York, and Mr. David Scott of Georgia, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on HRS 1302.
For what purposes does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Speaker, as member designated by Herrera, Butler, Stewart, Garbarino, Letlow, Hartzler, Curtis, Owens from several states across the country, I inform the House that they will all vote nay on the rule.
What purposes does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Boyle, Mr. Rupersberger, Ms. Trahan, Mr. McEachin, Ms. Newman, and Mr. Jones, I inform the House these members will vote yes on House Res 1302.
For what purposes does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Byron Donalds from Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Donalds will vote nay on the rule.
What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Babin of Texas, I inform the House that Mr. Babin will vote no on the rule.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Yeah, as the member designated by Mr. Jimenez of Florida, I inform the House that Mr. Jimenez will vote no on the previous question. Thank you.
What purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Donalds of Florida, I inform the House Mr. Donalds will vote nay on the rule.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
As a member designated by Mr. Wilson of South Carolina, I inform the House that Mr. Wilson will vote nay on the rule.
Does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Madam Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois, and from the House, Mr. Kinzinger will vote nay on the rule.
Purposes does the gentlewoman from Georgia rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bob Good from Virginia, I inform the House that Mr. Good will vote no on the rule.
What purposes does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker,
Here's the member designated by Dr. Gosar of Arizona. I inform the House that Dr. Gosar will vote no on HRS 1302.
For what purposes, gentleman from West Virginia, rise?
As the member designated by Mrs. Miller of West Virginia, I inform the House that Mrs. Miller will vote nay on the rule.
For what purposes does the gentlewoman from New Hampshire rise?
Madam Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Craig, Ms. Stevens, Ms. Bustos, Mr. Blumenauer, and Mr. Ryan, I inform the House that these members will vote yes on HRES 1302.
will come to order. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker,
Mr.
pursuant to House
Mr. Nadler,
Resolution...
wait a sec. Let me get a little more order here. Please take your conversations off the floor. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1302, I call up HR 1808, the assault weapons ban of 2022, and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title.
Union Calendar Number 346, H.R. 1808, a bill to regulate assault weapons to ensure that the right to keep and bear arms is not unlimited and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1302, in lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 117-60, modified by the amendment printed in House Report 117-448, is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered as read. The bill as amended shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H.R. 1808.
Objection. I'm going to ask my friends in the chamber to please take your conversations outside so that we can hear the debate on this matter. Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, today we take another step to advance historic gun violence prevention legislation. H.R. 1808, the Assault Weapons Ban Act of 2022, restores and updates the prior assault weapons ban that kept weapons of war out of our communities for a decade before Republicans opposed its renewal. As we have learned all too well in recent years, assault weapons, especially when combined with high-capacity magazines, are the weapon of choice for mass shootings. These military-style weapons are designed to kill the most people in the shortest amount of time. Quite simply, there is no place for them in our streets. In 1994, we banned these killing machines, and countless lives were saved. But that ban was allowed to lapse 10 years later. And since then, we have seen the predictable results. Mass shootings have increased exponentially, and our public spaces, schools, movie theaters, supermarkets, houses of worship, parades, you name it, have all become vulnerable to attack. Uvalde, Parkland, Tree of Life Synagogue. How many more mass shootings must we endure? When will we learn? Well, I hope we're starting to learn today. I hope we're starting to learn today indeed. The assault weapons ban would prohibit the sale, manufacture, transfer, or possession of semi-automatic assault weapons and large-capacity ammunition-feeding devices. At the same time, it grandfathers existing semi-automatic assault weapons and contains numerous protections for law enforcement and responsible gun owners, including hunters, gun collectors, farmers, sport shooters, and those who use firearms for self-defense. It is important to consider today's debate in the context of our other efforts to address the violence plaguing our communities. Time and again, Democrats have advanced responsible gun safety legislation only to face Republican opposition. We have advanced legislation to conduct background checks for all gun sales, to close the Charleston loophole, to close the boyfriend loophole, and to keep guns away from those who are a danger to themselves or others. We advanced my bill, the Protecting Our Kids Act, and we sent the President the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was signed into law and will save lives. These proposals were opposed by all but a few of our Republican colleagues. Today, they have another chance to take the action needed to make our communities safer. Will they stand with us? Will they show that they have learned? Or will they stand with an industry that right now is promoting a weapon to civilians as powerful enough to shoot through bulletproof vests? Will our Republicans choose to defend the weapons of choice for mass murderers and those who seek to target law enforcement? Or will they choose to defend Americans who simply want to go to school, to go shopping, to march in a parade, or to go to a movie theater without the fear of having a target on their back? It's an easy choice for me. I want to thank Congressman Cicilline for his leadership on this important legislation. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For years, the Democrats told us we're not coming for your guns. Oh, yes, they are. Let's be clear. The Second Amendment is as clear as possible, and that's their beef. The Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But they don't care. In fact, the sponsor of this legislation said so in committee. He said, quote, "Spare me the BS about constitutional rights." They don't care about that fundamental liberty law-abiding citizens in this country enjoy. And they're coming for your firearms. 6 weeks ago, it was the red flag law. You know, where someone who doesn't like you can report you to law enforcement or to a judge. There's a hearing that you can't be at, your counsel can't be present, you haven't been charged with the crime, but they can take your firearm. They can take your property, they can take away your Second Amendment liberties, and then you have to petition for a subsequent hearing to get that right back, and you have done nothing wrong and have not been charged with the crime. Then House Democrats passed the unconstitutional legislation that said 18 to 20-year-olds can't purchase a firearm. They can fight for our country, but they can't purchase a firearm. And today they're coming for your guns. 24 million of them. That's right, 24 million AR-style rifles are in the hands of law-abiding Americans today as we speak, and those individuals will not be able to sell or transfer that property. In the Heller case, the Supreme Court made clear that the Second Amendment protects firearms in common use at the time. During the markup, Representative Bishop asked the chairman, quote, is it the point of the bill to ban weapons that are in common use in the United States today? And the chairman said, the problem is that they are in common use. Yes, so this is the goal, and this is why it's unconstitutional. It couldn't be any clearer. Democrats don't care what the Constitution says. Fortunately, courts are correctly applying the Constitution. Last week, a federal district court judge in Colorado, who was appointed by President Obama, issued a temporary restraining order against the town of Superior, Colorado, to prevent it from implementing an assault weapon ban. The judge wrote, plaintiffs have stated that semi-automatic weapons, as well as magazines that hold more than 10 rounds, are commonly used by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, and therefore cannot be banned. And guess what this bill will do? It won't make communities safer. It won't make them safer at all. In fact, in the Heller case, the Supreme Court said, Second Amendment protects firearms in common use at the time, and also said this, quote, for lawful purposes like self-defense. 3 weeks ago, July 7th, 2022, a Florida homeowner used his AR-style rifle when individuals forcibly entered his home. After the homeowner opened fire, the individuals immediately fled. When asked if the homeowner would face charges, the Escambia County Sheriff Chip Simmons said, quote, absolutely not. The homeowner is protecting himself, and in Florida, you can do that. You can protect yourself. Democrats tried this ban before. It didn't work. It won't work now. And you know what it will do? It'll make communities, I think, less safe. What will make communities safer, though, is if Democrats stop defunding the police, stop cashless bail, start prosecuting criminals. They're taking away firearms used for self-defense by law-abiding Americans. This bill is wrong. It will make communities, I think, less safe, and it's unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, we reserve.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House The gentlelady from California, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlelady from California, Ms. Pelosi, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his great leadership. Mr. Speaker, each year, more children die from gun violence than any other cause: cancer, auto accidents, any other cause. Our nation has watched in unspeakable horror as assault weapons have been used in massacre after massacre in communities across the country. And disturbingly, so many of these mass shootings have targeted our precious children in their schools, at the movies, at the malls, and throughout our communities. That is why I rise today in strong support in reinstating the assault weapons ban, a long overdue step to get deadly weapons off our streets. Make no mistake, we know that an assault weapon ban can work because it has worked before. For 10 years, from 1994 to 2004, our families were protected by a strong assault weapon ban, strongly championed in the Senate by then Senator, now President Joe Biden. Chuck Schumer led the way over here, Dianne Feinstein in the Senate. I was a relatively new member of Congress who was whipping for this legislation. It made us all very, very proud. More importantly, it saved many lives. During that time, we witnessed gun crime with assault weapons drop by up to 40%. Let me repeat, gun violence by assault weapons reduced by 40%. Meanwhile, since the ban expired, the number of mass shooting deaths has grown by nearly 500%. And it is particularly sickening to now see these same deadly weapons, are you ready for this, being marketed to children. Here's an advertisement for a JR-15 designed to be a so-called smaller, safer, lighter version of the horrific AR-15, which has been used to murder so many of their playmates and friends. Look at this, these little skulls with ponytails and that. The manufacturer stated that their goal was to develop a shooting platform that was not only sized correctly, but also looks, feels, and operates just like mom and dad's gun. Mom and dad's gun, they use that expression. Indeed, gun maker We One Tactical launched the Junior 15 and said, quote, "We are excited to start capturing the imagination of the next generation." Indeed, this callousness is disgusting. It's despicable, and it reminds us that the crisis of gun violence requires action. To the families who are survivors and have suffered from gun violence, we have said over and over again, we will not stop until the job is done. We thank them for turning their sorrow to help others, prevent others from suffering in that way. They've turned their agony into action. Now, whether we're saying we're going from Newtown to Uvalde, everything in between, and since, there's so many deaths, so much sorrow, so much hope that we would get the job done. They are so responsible for our bringing this legislation to the floor. Their outside mobilization, their advocacy with great intellectual integrity has made all the difference. Today, House Democrats will vote to reinstate the assault weapons ban with strong protections for children and families. The bill prohibits the sale, manufacture, transfer, or possession of semi-automatic assault weapons, as well as high-capacity magazines. And contrary to what the gentleman on the other side of the aisle said, it requires safe storage for lawfully owned assault weapons already in our communities. It's not about taking guns away from people who should have them. It's about safe storage. You have a problem with that? And it strongly supports our law enforcement heroes who should not have to confront weapons designed for the battlefield, instead in our communities. To be clear, this is a very special day in the Congress of the United States that history will record as one designed to save lives. For his passionate, persistent leadership on this legislation, let me salute Congressman David Cicilline, I don't know if he's on the floor, who has been fighting ferociously on this issue for years and years. To Lucy McBath, who has been, again, a member of the Committee of Jurisdiction, an intellectual resource, a strategic thinker, and inspiration to all of us, who turned her personal grief into action and makes a difference. And thank you, Chairman Jerry Nadler, Chair of the Judiciary Committee, for steering this legislation through the Judiciary Committee and to the floor. And also, I want to recognize, once again, President Joe Biden's longtime leadership on this issue and the beautiful words he expressed about this when we were celebrating the bipartisan safety bill recently. Mr. Speaker, all those who have had the privilege of serving in this hallowed halls take a solemn oath to the American people. At the heart of our oath is our duty to protect and defend. To protect and defend the Constitution, the American people. With this legislation, we honor this foremost responsibility. And when the House returns in August, we will bring to the floor a robust public safety package beyond this. Let me be clear. House Democrats are for people over politics. And say to our friends in this body and down the hall and wherever they are, your political survival is insignificant compared to the survival of children who are at the mercy of these guns. We believe that every American deserves to live in a safe community where they and their families can thrive. That's why Democrats are funding our police while making reforms for better law enforcement training and accountability as we give them the tools, the police, the tools they need to prevent crime. We are so proud of the work done by CBC Chair Joyce Beatty, working with Representatives Josh Gottheimer and Abigail Spanberger to make historic legislation that has prioritizing meeting the needs of our law enforcement officers while at the same time having accountability. That is historic. We haven't passed that before. And I'm more confident than ever that we will pass a package rooted in two of the Democrats' most cherished values, justice and safety. I urge my colleagues to support the assault weapons ban, recognizing, again, that the survival of our children is more important than the political survival of any of us. And with that, I urge a strong and hopefully bipartisan vote to put people over politics by reinstating the assault weapon ban, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to HR 1808, the assault weapons ban of 2022. Here they go again. Once again, my colleagues across the aisle have rushed to exploit your fear and the pain of victims to rush out a gun control measure that will do nothing to save lives or address the root causes of violence. I say exploit your fear, and I point to the Speaker of the House just stood in this well with a poster that had a toy gun on it and wants you to feel scared about that. Well, I have a 6-year-old son, and he has toy guns. And he knows about muzzle discipline. He knows you don't put your finger on the trigger. He knows you don't point it at people. I'm able to teach my son gun safety and make him safer. You don't live through fear. This and other gun control measures like red flag laws, they make the other side feel better. But today's bill will do nothing but disarm law-abiding citizens. Congress has tried this before. 1994, a 10-year assault weapons ban was first enacted. This ban did not stop violent crime or prevent heart-wrenching tragedies like Columbine. Yes, Columbine happened while we had an assault weapons ban. In fact, after the ban ended, the Department of Justice issued a report that concluded, should it be renewed, the ban's effects on gun violence are likely to be small at best, and perhaps too small for reliable measurement. Assault weapons were rarely used in gun crimes even before the ban. That's the Department of Justice. The results are in, folks. A so-called assault weapons ban does not work. But what it does is it takes away your rights and it leaves you vulnerable. Simple truth is criminals don't follow the law. If they did, think about this. If criminals followed the law, we wouldn't have any crime. But when you criminalize guns, only criminals are going to have guns. And so I urge you to vote no
time has
on this
expired.
legislation, and I yield back.
Gentleman
Thank
yields
you.
back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 4 minutes to the sponsor of the bill, a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
Mr. Cicilline is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 1808, the assault weapons ban, legislation that will help reduce the gun massacres being committed in our communities by weapons of war. These military-style weapons were designed for the battlefield, for maximum efficiency when a soldier is engaged in combat. And the military features banned by this bill are added to make these guns more accurate, more controllable, more concealable, and more deadly, enabling killers to murder as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. These weapons have no place in our communities. They turn our streets, our schools, our grocery stores, our movie theaters, and hospitals into bloody battlefield scenes, and they kill our children, our friends, and neighbors, and the police officers trying to protect them. In 2016 and 2017 alone, more than 24 officers were slain in the line of duty by an assault weapon. 1 in 5 officers is killed in the line of duty by these weapons, which is why the Major City Police Chiefs Association endorses this legislation. Yet for nearly 18 years, we failed to take action to stop them from flooding into our communities and being used time and time and time again in mass shootings. It's unconscionable that anyone can walk into a store and legally purchase a weapon capable of inflicting the carnage we've seen in Highland Park, in Buffalo, in Uvalde, in Atlanta, in Sutherland Springs, Las Vegas, Orlando, Parkland, and the list goes on and on. Today, the House is finally taking a long overdue and necessary step to reinstitute a ban on these exceptionally dangerous weapons. We didn't just come up with this proposal out of thin air and propose it. The original assault weapons ban was in place from 1994 to 2004, and we have clear evidence that it was effective in reducing these killings. Compared with the decade before its adoption, the 1994 assault weapons ban was associated with a 25% drop in gun massacres and a 40% drop in fatalities. And as soon as the ban expired, fatalities and shootings skyrocketed again. And when an assault weapon is used during a mass shooting, 6 times as many people are shot. So today I'm imploring my colleagues to take action to get these weapons of war designed for maximum destruction of human life off our streets. Let me be clear. I respect the Second Amendment, but it's not without limits. Imagine if we clung to the desire to protect our children and our communities as tightly as some of my colleagues cling to their rifles. There are more guns than people in this country, more mass shootings than days in the year. This is a uniquely American problem. This bill won't stop all gun violence, but it will effectively decrease it. Because they were designed for military combat, these weapons don't just kill. They decimate. The shots fired can tear a softball-sized wound into a victim. And we know how we can reduce the suffering. Researchers estimate that if we still had a federal assault weapons ban, we would see a 70% decline in mass shooting deaths. Let that sink in. If the ban had remained in effect, 70% of the families torn apart by these massacres would still have their loved ones. We can't bring back 70% of these victims to their families and friends, but we can work to prevent more carnage moving forward. Let me end by saying this. In my faith tradition, we are taught that whoever destroys a soul, it is considered as if they destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves a life, it is considered as if they saved an entire world. Let's come together to save lives. Pass this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio. Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Sheriff Rutherford.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, America doesn't have a gun violence problem. We have a human violence problem. But those across the aisle don't want to talk about that, because then you have to talk about the culture of death that we have created in this country, killing 63 million unborn children, denying the sanctity of life. That's the conversation that they don't want to have. Mr. Speaker, as a former police officer, I've encountered many dangerous people with guns, and we stopped them before they hurt themselves or others. We identified them. We identified the threats that they were making, and then we were able to intervene and stop those individuals before they became a shooter. That is what we should be focused on. In the wake of these recent tragedies, give law enforcement the tools and resources to stop those who have shown a propensity to become violent. That's what we should be focusing on, not defunding the police, not demoralizing the police, not delegitimizing the police. We should be focused on assisting the police in identifying these individuals who want to commit crime. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the committee, the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, America doesn't have to be the only country where mass shootings occur sometimes daily. You know, sometimes I hear people say, well, it's a mental health problem. I'll tell you what, people have mental health problems in countries all over the world. But only one country has mass shootings the way America does. And we need to have a national answer to this. The killer that killed my constituents at the Gilroy Garlic Festival couldn't buy the assault weapon in California, so he just went over to Nevada and bought it there. We need a national answer. We know it works. When the last ban expired, the number of mass shooting deaths increased by 483%. You know, Americans deserve to be safe and to be free of fear that when their kids go to school, they'll be obliterated. You know, we need to put the American people ahead of politics. We need to put American children ahead of politics. We need to vote yes. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Is that 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, we do have a culture of human violence. Recently, a 16-year-old young man with 3 felony arrests in the past 4 months violently attacked and attempted to choke a New York subway police officer. He was released without bail. And that is what's happening where you have the left in charge of criminal justice systems. And why do I bring that up? Because that individual punched that police officer more than 20 times in his attempts to basically kill that officer. And personal weapons such as hands, fists, or feet account for 600 homicides in 2019, according to official reports. And 1,476 murders were committed with knives or cutting instruments, and 364 homicides were committed with rifles. You see the distinction here? But where the Democrats are going for, they want to take away someone's constitutional right instead of enforcing the law for people who are violently and criminally violent. They're going to release those people back into your streets. The Supreme Court has held the Second Amendment protects arms in common use. But at markup, Chairman Nadler admitted that the purpose of the bill is to ban firearms that are in common use. Think about that. That does violence to the Constitution. They simply want to ban guns, and this is just another step along that path. At markup, it became very clear that Democrats don't even understand the guns that they are trying to ban. But they don't care, because when they say they want to put politics above people, or that we shouldn't, what they really mean is they're going to. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Ms. Jackson Lee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I think that we will spend most of our time here today where facts will be told and then rhetorical conversation will be told as well. Fact, the Constitution in the Second Amendment does not prohibit the ban on assault weapons. Fact, 1808, led by Mr. Cicilline, allows gun owners to hold their guns. This deals with the transfer of guns. Fact, as we can see, the lives of our children are lost through carnage, bloodshed, and murder. Fact, by the hands of an AR-15, an assault-style weapon. Our fellow citizens, fact, are killed by an AR-15, 14, an assault-style weapon. Fact, that every weapon of mass carnage is not done by a knife, a BB gun. It is not done by throwing a water bomb or words. It is not done by taking a bus and running over citizens. It is done by assault-style weapons. So I rise today to support HR1808 because I am tired of a fact of doing nothing. Mayor Bowser has a right to complain about Governor Abbott generating individuals unfairly, unjustly, and wrongly to another jurisdiction. But fact is that these weapons have killed. And so without any concern, we are now offering facts. And anyone that suggests that we are taking guns from good gun owners, we are not. Ask unanimous consent to put in the record several articles dealing with the Washington Post, the CBS News, and KXAN. Ask unanimous consent. Vote for HR 1808.
Without objection, gentlelady's time has expired. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, here's the fact. This bill is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court made clear the Second Amendment protects firearms in common use. This bill has 8 pages of firearms that it bans, including 24 million firearms that American citizens, law-abiding American citizens, possess today. That is the fact. I yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Gomert.
Mr. Gomert is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my friend from Ohio. The previous assault weapons ban that was referenced by our speaker, I just want to make sure the record is actually correct. The FBI that kept the data had to admit, as sympathetic as they were to assault weapons ban, that actually it doesn't appear to have really made any difference. We want to talk about crime since then. We can talk about the big cities that have come under control of Democratic authority who have pushed for things like no bond. But John Adams had it exactly right. This Constitution is intended for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the governing of any other. So we're either going to have to get rid of all of our constitutional rights. We can't even allow freedom of assembly or speech, much less Second Amendment, if we're not going to teach moral right and wrong. And what are we finding? We're finding in our schools, of course, they're not teaching the Ten Commandments, and instead they're teaching to envy. Look around, covet, see who has something more than you, and you should envy and covet it. And just keep in mind, under the big city laws now, look, if you get violent, we'll give you no bond, we'll let you right back out. You want to know what would do more right now than banning AR-15s would be to ban Democrat thinking in the big cities that's allowing the crime rates to just explode. We've always had guns in America. That's why there is an America. But we've never had a time like this when we were teaching our children everything but the moral imperatives. That's why this bill needs to go down, and we need to go after the causes of our violence. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Garcia.
Ms. Garcia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of reinstating the assault weapons ban. This bill would put military-grade assault weapons out of circulation for civilians. For me, the choice between banning assault weapons and protecting young, innocent children is a no-brainer. I put children above guns. It pains me deeply that our children and our communities live in fear of suddenly losing their lives or the lives of loved ones on a daily basis. I am a gun owner myself, Mr. Speaker. I was raised on a farm in South Texas, and I know how to use a gun, especially for hunting. But assault weapons are not for hunting. They are used to kill people quickly, efficiently, and as fast as they can. And that type of weapon is used solely for that, for killing people, and it has no place in our communities. One child's life is worth more than all the assault weapons in the world. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Mr. Klein's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My fellow Americans, the Democrats are coming for your guns. This assault weapons ban is unconstitutional because it would ban firearms that are currently in common use, making the scope of the bill's semi-automatic assault weapon ban overly broad by capturing millions of sporting rifles, shotguns, and pistols that simply have certain accessories and cosmetic features. In fact, the bill focuses mostly on appearance, which would arbitrarily ban some firearm models while exempting others with the same functionality. This bill would not reduce violent crime, as Democrats claim, since studies have shown that the effect of the last assault weapons ban from 1994 on violent crime was perhaps too small for reliable measurement. Instead, what this bill and all other legislation from Democrats aimed at gun control will do is directly infringe on the rights of law-abiding Americans. And they're not going to stop here. There'll always be another scary-looking gun that they think looks scary that needs to be banned. There'll always be another loophole that they have created out of thin air that they need to close with more bans. Mr. Speaker, this document says shall not be infringed. I urge a no vote on this bill.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Jordan reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
Mr. Neguse is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Speaker and I thank the Chairman for his leadership. I rise today in support of HR1808. As the Speaker knows, my fellow Coloradan, just last year we mourned the loss of 10 individuals who were shot, murdered at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, in my district. Last week we honored the 10-year anniversary of the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting. The people in our communities fear whether they are even safe to walk into their local grocery store and buy food for their families without the threat of gun violence. Since the federal assault weapons ban expired in 2004, the scourge of gun violence has only grown more pervasive across our country. We have come together in the past to protect our communities. In 1994, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle joined together to pass a similar piece of legislation to that we are voting on today. I'd humbly ask my colleagues that we do the same this evening. Let's pass this bill for our children and for safer communities. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the ranking member, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm voting against the erosion of constitutional rights of law-abiding Americans. In the long history of mankind, freedom and liberty are not lost overnight, but it comes by way of a slow and gradual burn. We've seen an unprecedented assault on our First Amendment through the legacy media and social media, giants censoring the thoughts and opinions and individuals of the right while propping up their favorite candidates and covering up stories that could be detrimental to their public personas. Policies are then implemented that are anti-religious freedom, anti-due process, anti-free assembly, and today, anti-Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. These rights shall not be infringed. Instead of making families and communities safer, this backward gun-grabbing attempt does nothing to harden school security, address our mental health crisis, or reverse the depreciation of our morals and values. No, it does nothing for that, but it tears at the fabric of our Constitution. I urge my colleagues to protect the Constitution and vote no. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Ms. Dean is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 4 grandchildren. The youngest, Scotty, was born just last year in 2021. In Scotty's world, guns kill more kids than cars do. In Scotty's world, there are 692 mass shootings every year. And when she goes off to school, Scotty will learn her active shooter drills as she learns to tie her shoes. We don't have to live like this. If we only had the courage, if we all only had the courage to pass the assault weapons ban to regulate semi-automatic guns. Our gun violence crisis demands this and other solutions. This will save lives. Experts reveal that the casualties of mass shootings would have dropped by 70% if the last assault weapons ban had stayed in place. How will I explain to Scotty that the other side boasts of 24 million assault-style weapons in the hands of Americans and says not one word about the 24,000 people dead in just 7 months of this year from guns? We must act. Join me. Have the courage to join me. Pass the assault weapons ban for Scotty's future and for all of our children. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
Mr. Roy is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Ohio. Fact, this assault weapon ban bill is unconstitutional. Chairman Nadler even recognized when he stated that, quote, the problem is that these weapons are in common use. And in Heller, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bill of Rights clearly protects firearms in common use. This is an unconstitutional piece of legislation. Fact, this assault weapons bill will ban the weapons in common use, and my colleagues will most assuredly target citizens to take their guns. In the words of Democratic perpetual candidate Beto O'Rourke, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. That's the truth, and everyone knows it. Don't hide behind it. Everybody knows precisely what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are doing. Fact, less than 2% of all prisoners had a firearm obtained from a retail source at the time they committed their crimes. Only 13% of the offenders in state prison population obtained their firearms from a retail source. Criminals usually don't get their guns at gun stores through legal channels. That's the fact. Another fact, upwards of 80% are committed by people with prior arrest records, often by people with prior convictions for violent crimes or prior weapons offenses, and almost none of our gun control proposals, and particularly this one, are targeted at this group. That's the truth. Those are the facts. The fact, as Thomas Jefferson said, the strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny and government, the precise kind of tyranny that my colleagues are exercising today. Precisely when they're opening our borders up to lawless cartels and gangs, precisely when they're defunding the police, precisely when they're making our communities unsafe, they want to limit the ability of the American people to defend themselves and to exercise their Second Amendment rights to protect their families. That's what's happening on the floor, so my colleagues can appeal to their liberal white voters while they ignore the black men and women and brown men and women who are buying weapons to defend themselves in criminal hellholes in our country.
Gentleman's
I yield
time has
back.
expired. Gentleman from Ohio, reserve.
In common use. Chairman Nadler candidly responded, quote, "That's the point of the bill." In other words, the essence of the bill is to stop commerce in weapons, as alternatively described by the court in Heller in 2008, as those, quote, "typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes," close quote. Heller explained the origins of the right to keep and bear arms in militia service. Ordinarily, when called for militia service, able-bodied men were expected to appear bearing arms supplied by themselves and of the kind in common use at the time. The Supreme Court further explained, we also recognize another important limitation on the right to keep and bear and carry arms. Miller said, as we have explained, that the sort of weapons protected were those, quote, "in common use at the time." This was explained and recapitulated in Bruin just a month ago on June 23. And we see repeatedly that this is being defied. In fact, 1 week after Bruin, the Supreme Court granted petitions for certiorari, vacated and remanded one state ban on MSRs and a state ban on magazines in common use to be reconsidered.
Gentleman's time has expired.
This is defiance of the Supreme Court, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Gentleman from New York's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to Mr. Roy, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a report from Third Way entitled "The Red State Murder Problem."
Without objection.
And, Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this assault weapons ban to reclaim our streets, churches, schools, and synagogues. Assault weapons are killing machines and the weapon of choice for mass murderers. In my own county in Parkland, a lone teenager slaughtered 17 people by himself, all because he had an assault weapon. This deranged individual tragically, brutally killed and then overturned the lives of those families and forever changed our entire community. But this is no isolated case. Similar mass murders haunt Las Vegas, El Paso, Buffalo, Uvalde, Orlando, Pittsburgh, and too many other communities for me to list here today. No parent should fear seeing a child off to a mall, movie theater, or school, knowing that a killer wielding a weapon designed to kill as many people as possible, as fast as possible, may lay in wait for them. We need a whole-of-government solution to this health epidemic, including enforced ammunition background checks. But let's take these killing machines off our streets and end this fear that one person with one assault weapon in one moment can tragically tear countless lives apart. Republicans, take note. The Supreme Court clearly allows limitations on weapons in their decisions.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Doesn't make it true. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the ranking member. There is a motion to recommit that I would like to offer. If we adopt a motion to recommit, we will instruct the House Committee on Judiciary consider the amendment to HR 1808, which excludes active duty and retired military from the ban on assault weapons. I therefore ask unanimous consent to include the text of the amendment in the record immediately prior to the vote on the motion to recommit.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, just imagine you're a 17-year-old who makes a decision to enlist in the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and then that 17-year-old goes through 8 weeks of basic combat training, BCT, at one of the basic training centers in Fort Jackson or Fort Knox or Fort Benning. And then they're given a service weapon, an M16 typically, and taught to assemble, disassemble that weapon down to the bolt. They'll go through the training with the drill sergeant. They'll be on a range. On a live fire range with this service weapon. And then the 17-year-old to go to AIT to be taught their specialty and continue to be on active duty or in the reserves or in the National Guard. And then potentially deployed. What this bill seeks to do is prevent this member of the military who comes home, either to the Reserve Unit or National Guard unit, or on active duty, from purchasing a rifle that they can use on their own. My colleagues who support the bill are saying, we trusted you to join the service. We encouraged you to join the service. But then when it comes down to it, we really don't trust you to go out and purchase that weapon. It makes no sense. If the majority is going to snub every veteran in this country by saying, we don't trust you, how can the U.S. government ask someone to enlist when they don't trust them to have the same responsibility with their own personal weapon? Mr. Speaker, if we adopt a motion to recommit, we will instruct the Committee on Judiciary to consider my amendment to H.R. 1808 to ensure that the nation's active duty members and veterans will be
Gentleman's
trusted.
time has expired.
30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized for another 30 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, it's still amazing to me that the majority rejected this in the Judiciary Committee. They talk a good game when it comes to veterans, but when it comes right down to it, they don't trust them. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio. Reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider. Mr.
Schneider, sorry. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute. Mr. Schneider is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in emphatic support of HR 1808, the assault weapons ban of 2022. Over the past few weeks, survivors of the horrific shooting in Highland Park, Illinois, came to D.C. determined to make change. They teamed up with families from Uvalde, Parkland, and Newtown to demand an assault weapons ban to reduce the chance of other communities experiencing the trauma they all tragically bear. Today, thanks in no small part to their efforts, the American people will get that recorded vote. The world is watching. No other nation experiences a grotesque number of murders from deranged individuals turning weapons of war on kids in school, families at prayer, people watching a parade. The vote we are taking today will show the families of those murdered exactly who is on their side, who is protecting our children and putting people over politics, and conversely, who is on the other side voting for their own power. I thank Speaker Pelosi and Congressman Cicilline for working tirelessly to secure a timely vote, and I urge passage of this bill. I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair will advise the managers. Mr. Nadler has 13 minutes. Mr. Jordan has 11 minutes. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde.
Mr. Clyde is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you to the gentleman from Ohio. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 1808, which is just the latest gun-grabbing bill Democrats are dangerously ramming through their unconstitutional crusade to disarm America. The ink is barely dry on this anti-gun bill from last month, and here they are pushing another anti-gun bill that proclaims to make us safer, but does the exact opposite. It puts citizens at greater risk by taking away the rights of the law-abiding. This legislation takes aim at our Constitution by banning what the Democrats call assault weapons, which is a vague political term used as a catchphrase to make the public think they are banning guns that assault people. But the truth is, the bill would ban the most popular semi-automatic rifle in America, the AR-15, and what the industry calls modern sporting rifles. The Democrats have consistently called them weapons of war and are trying to ban them from being purchased by law-abiding citizens. But who does this bill exempt? The federal government. Federal government agencies like the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Housing and Urban Development, and down the line. So if they're weapons of war, as the Democrats call them, what do these departments need with weapons of war? Is the Department of Education going to use them against the moms and dads who protest against woke local school board policies? Is the Department of Housing and Urban Development going to use them against
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu.
Ms. Chu is recognized for 1 minute.
We are the only country in the world where mass shootings continuously happen. They happen in schools, grocery stores, malls, hospitals, parades, you name it. In America, there has not been a single week in 2022 without a mass shooting. Weapons of war especially have no place in our streets or schools or our grocery stores. They have no place in nail salons or churches or shopping malls. About their horrific impact on children like this, a trauma surgeon said, the tissue destruction is almost unimaginable. Bones are exploded. Soft tissue is absolutely destroyed. It's like a bomb went off. But we in Congress can end this. We can end this uniquely American plague of mass death caused by gun violence. I support the assault weapons ban because we cannot wait to act until the next mass shooting. We must pass this bill today.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We reserve. Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Mr. Green is recognized for 1 minute.
And still I rise, Mr. Speaker. I rise to announce that I will vote for this legislation. And I will do so because I know that there are 19 babies who were murdered at Robb Elementary School in Texas who will never have the right to vote. I rise to vote for it because there are 2 teachers who were murdered, who will never have the opportunity to seek the future that was theirs. I rise because we have a governor in the state of Texas who could have saved all of those lives if he had but only, after the shooting at Walmart that took 23 lives, passed legislation such as what we're passing today. I rise because I don't want the blood of the next person murdered with an AR-15 type weapon on my head. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We will continue to reserve, Mr.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Gentlelady from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I've heard a lot of talk today about the Constitution. Well, when the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, these kind of weapons didn't even exist. They had muskets and flintlock pistols that could fire 3 or 4 shots in a minute in a good day, and they weren't very accurate at all. Founding Fathers did not know or anticipate these weapons of mass destruction that shooters use today to kill as many innocent people as brutally and quickly as possible. And that's exactly what they did in my district on October the 1st, 2070, when you had 60 people shot at a concert. I urge my colleagues on the other side to have the courage to stand up to the NRA and support this legislation. It's common sense, it's necessary, and it will prevent mass shootings and save lives. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from
Reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves, then the gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the Chairman of the Appropriations Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Ms. DeLauro is recognized for 1 minute.
26 souls, including 20 babies, massacred at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Parkland, Buffalo, Uvalde. The common denominator, an AR-15 style assault weapon, the weapon of choice. 8 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings involved an assault weapon. We cannot be numb to this needless violence. It is long past time for us to act. In Connecticut, the tragedy at Sandy Hook changed our lives forever. These are unspeakable tragedies. They are avoidable tragedies, and they're happening in our schools. Our grocery stores, our places of worship. The legislation before us today will reduce the prevalence of assault weapons, ban the purchase of assault weapons, get them off of our streets, make our communities safer, protect our children, save their lives. Is that not the noblest of goals? To save lives. We have the opportunity to do that in this body today. Enough is enough.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would yield 5 minutes to the chair of the Second Amendment Caucus, the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Massey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank to the gentleman from Ohio. If facts are the ammunition of debate, I'd like to point out that the other side of the aisle entered this room unarmed. There's so many mischaracterizations, or misfires, if you will, about this bill and what this bill does that I don't know where to start. But let me start here with the words of the author of this bill. He says it will ban weapons of war only suitable for soldiers in combat. Is that what it does? Does it ban an M16? It doesn't ban an M16 or an M4. It bans the most commonly sold rifle in the United States today and for the last several years. It doesn't ban weapons of war. It explicitly exempts the M1 Garand. General Patton said the M1 Garand is the finest implement of battle ever devised. Why is it exempted? It's a weapon of war. It exempts the M1 carbine. Look at the picture of the soldiers, the Marines at Iwo Jima. What were they carrying? The M1 carbine. It exempts the quintessential Cold War weapon, the pride of the Chinese and the communists, the SKS. It's exempted in this bill. These are literal weapons of war that are not in this bill. Now, they'll come back and ban those, but they don't want to ban them right now because they don't look scary enough. They have a wooden forestock and a wooden butt. They're not made of plastic. They don't look like the scary stuff on the news, so they have no interest in banning that. Literal, actual weapons of war are not banned, but the most common firearm sold today is banned. But let's take them at their word. Weapons of war, these are weapons of war. We got to ban weapons of war. Well, they exempt 80-some federal agencies from the ban. Literally every bureaucratic agency in the government can have a weapon of war under this bill. Weapons of war, as they call them. So we offered an amendment in the committee. We couldn't conceive of why the Department of Education
would need a weapon of war to complete their mission of educating our children.